Well, welcome back to Public Affairs on Peach. I'm Ben Swan. My guest now, Edward Ahmed Mitchell. He is the Executive Director of the Council of American Islamic Relations here in Atlanta. Welcome.
Thanks,
Good to have you here.
Thanks,
so, we've been talking obviously about all these different attacks in Europe that have taken place recently. We have the attack out in Manchester, England, outside the Ariana Grande concert, attacks in really throughout the UK and also in France and in Germany.
Yeah.
There is obviously a conception that people have that ISIS is behind these. ISIS, we were talking about this in the previous segment, loves to take credit for this, whether they're actually responsible or not. And then, of course, you have self-radicalized, the term that's used for Muslims. Right. How do you deal with people who want to paint all Muslims with this brush of terrorist or potential terror?
Yeah. Well, terrorism knows no religion. There are Christian terrorists, there are right-wing terrorists, there are Muslim terrorists. The best thing that the American Muslim community can do is to be good citizens and good Muslims. That's what we do every day. But we also make sure that we're taking steps to prevent extremism within our own communities. Here in Georgia, we held an annual anti-extremism seminar to discuss extremist propaganda, how to notice it, how to counter it. We encourage our political leaders to pursue policies that will reduce the threat of terrorism, an American foreign policy that is more moral and just around the world. And of course, we also give advice to law enforcement about how to properly combat terrorism. It's not by painting the Muslim community with a broad brush. It's not by targeting and investigating peaceful, loyal citizens of the United States. It's by targeting people who are extremists.
Certainly. So when you talk about terrorism in general, is there a role that media has in all this? And the reason I ask you that, we have the shooting this past week in Alexandria, and it was a white man from Chicago who was a Bernie Sanders supporter at one time, and he goes and he shoots up this baseball field and critically injures at least one member of Congress. If that shooter had been a Muslim or had been of Arab descent, would the term terrorist already have been used, or is the media more careful when the skin color is a different issue?
If he had been Muslim, he wouldn't be called a shooter, he would be called a terrorist. And we would automatically assume that religion was his motivation, not mental illness or political grievances, just religion. And of course, that's a problem. You know, as an American Muslim, I don't like to whine about the media. It is what it is. I try to solve problems. So we try to make sure we're interacting with law enforcement reporters to let them introduce themselves to the Muslim community, see what we're all about, and hopefully they will then be more cautious when reporting the news to say that same deference we give to shooters who happen to be white, we're going to give that to anyone, and we're going to take a moment and see what the real motivation was and report on that, not engage in speculation that creates hysteria and potentially hate speech and hate crimes against peaceful American Muslims.
Well, speaking of which, here in Atlanta, have you heard from Muslims who tell you that when there is an attack, for instance, something that happens in Manchester, that they begin to see maybe attitudes towards them changing, or hate speech, or attitudes towards them being not just negative, but even at times violent?
The one positive thing that has come out of all this drama is that so many people are interested in knowing what Muslims are really like, is that we've engaged in a lot of interfaith dialogue, especially here in the state of Georgia. So what I find actually is that when a hate crime occurs or a terrorist attack occurs, you actually find a lot more outreach going on between the Muslim and non-Muslim community, which can be a positive thing. Are there incidents of hate crimes and hate speech? Yes. We've held self-defense seminars to help Muslims, especially visible Muslims, protect themselves. But on the whole, I've actually seen a lot more connectivity between people of different faiths over the past year especially.
Now, CARE Georgia hosts an annual anti-extremism seminar. It's called Muslims Rebutting Extremism.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, look, many people don't realize that Muslims condemn terrorism. We do it vocally. We do it whenever it happens. In fact,
despite what the media may tell you.
Right. In fact, CARE does it so vocally that ISIS has threatened to kill the leader of our organization. So we're very forthright in condemning terrorism. The seminar is a chance for us to give guidance to the Muslim community about how to recognize and counter extremist propaganda, but also to the non-Muslim community about what terrorists really want and how to counter their goals, because many terrorists are motivated by either a desire to create a world war between religions or a desire to address some political grievance. They're angry about something our government has done. In either case, we need to educate our leaders about what is actually motivating terrorists so they can address the underlying issues and we can hopefully reduce the threat in the long term.
We have less than 1 minute left, but I do want to ask you about some of the biggest misconceptions. I think you're touching on some of them here about Muslims right now, and for better or for worse, that are coming in the culture and in the media.
Right. So I think the first, you hear these crazy conspiracy theories that American Muslims are plotting to impose Sharia law on the country. You hear these crazy conspiracy theories that Muslims are all closet terrorists. This is nonsense, and it's actually very similar to what some bigots used to say about Catholic Americans and Jewish Americans, that they were disloyal citizens. It's not true. There are 3 million American Muslims, doctors, lawyers, engineers, business owners, 5,000 American Muslim soldiers, African Muslim slaves helped build this country. Some of our most popular figures, Muhammad Ali, are Muslims. So I think people just have to look around and they'll see that Muslims, normal Muslims, are contributing to our country in a positive way.
Open up those eyes a little bit. Thanks so much for being with us, and
Thank you
for joining us for this edition of Public Affairs on Peach.